monogamy is a social construct. Monogamy is a social construct. And it's like, all right, well, big coincidence that it was socially constructed in every society and culture on earth ever,
True,
right?
around the globe.
There's
Yeah,
marriage. There's no culture that we know of where there's no marriage, right? There's no culture that
true.
we know of where nobody falls in love.
At First Rounds on Me, we believe that one real date is better than 100 pen pals. With our mobile dating app, we make it fun and easy for you to meet someone in person for a real date. See someone you're interested in? We help plan your date. Pick a drink, a time, a venue, and send that person a date invite. It's that simple.
Welcome back to Crowdsourcing Love. I'm Marin, and today I have Macken Murphy with me. Hi, Macken.
Hi,
How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. This is a beautiful studio.
It is. It's
Yeah.
a good one. So Macken usually lives in Australia. Who are you? Please introduce yourself.
So I'm Macken. I'm best known, I think, at this point as a scientist studying human mating behavior. So I look into people's relationship dynamics and things like that,
Yep.
and how people choose who they choose and why they do the things they do.
Wow.
And I do that mostly in Australia at the University of Melbourne, where I'm a PhD student. I'm an Oxford graduate, and I'm originally from Boston.
Okay. Originally from Boston, studied in London, and now studying in Australia.
Yeah, studied in Oxford, now studying in Melbourne. Yeah,
Is Oxford in London?
it's kind of near London. Yeah,
Okay.
it's like hour and a half out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Does your family miss you? You keep
Terribly.
going further and further.
I know. I'm trying to get as far away as possible. No, they're actually my family's lovely, and they're begging for me to come back constantly. I think
Yeah.
the hard rule is that they need to see me in like 2026. So
Okay.
yeah,
So
that's when my PhD supposedly is going to end, and then I'll probably try to come back to America, come near Boston, hopefully.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you're gonna make your way back to America at some
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
Okay. And the way I found you was via TikTok.
Okay.
You also have an Instagram, and you have like these really condensed videos about just dating and human mating behavior in relationships, where you essentially like cite like 3 or 4 studies within each one. And I really like it because there's a lot of dating gurus out there
We're just making stuff
who are
up.
just saying things
Yeah.
and there's no data to back it up.
Yep.
So I love that you have the data to back it up. Do you get kind of annoyed with some of those gurus out there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's kind of two things that really annoy me online. One of them is people just making stuff up, right?
Mhm.
Just de novo, there's no background to what they're saying,
Mhm.
and it's just something that they feel or something from their like kind of highly nuanced personal experience,
Yep.
and they're just making it up, putting it online as a fact. That annoys me. What kind of annoys me more, to be honest, and I don't make like clapback style videos or anything, but I'm constantly tempted
Yeah.
by people who really they have no education on the subject, but they're educated enough on another subject to be able to like pick out one study or something. Like
Okay.
you noted, I'm glad you noted that on my videos, I tend to cite several studies
Yeah.
that back the point that I'm making,
Mhm.
because science doesn't work. I mean, it works one study at a time, but it doesn't work one study on its own, right?
Right.
One study showing an effect. It's like if I'm talking about one study, I always go out of my way to say, hey, this is just one study,
Yeah.
usually at least. In science, though, really, it's like you're looking at bodies of research, lines of evidence, right? Ongoing discussions.
Yep.
And so I'll see these viral TikToks where someone will pick out one study on like, I don't know, women's behavior changing at ovulation or something.
Mm.
And it's like it's a legit study and they're correctly describing what's in it, but because they didn't go to school for it and they don't work in it, they're unaware that that same study didn't replicate, right? And there are
Yeah.
6 other studies that show, different effects using very similar data,
Yeah.
and that there's a critique published where someone said, actually, if you reanalyze that data in a different way, the effect doesn't even come out.
Right.
And it's like, okay, so it's legit that you picked out one study, but what's frustrating is that you don't have the background to be able to assess, the full body. And I'm not saying that I'm, impervious to making mistakes. I certainly have and probably will continue to do.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, they try to use science to back whatever narrative they have by picking out, one study, and that's just not how science works to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
1000%. I studied psychology too, and I have my master's degree in counseling, and there's a whole class on statistics and like understanding if something's actually significant. And so I really appreciate that you're out here bringing science to the dating sphere. That's great. Okay, so is modern dating truly harder than ever, or has it always been this hard?
Well, it's hard to know because the only time that I mean, hard is kind of a difficult metric, right?
It
And
feels pretty hard.
yeah.
It's hard is a feeling, but
Yeah,
yeah.
right. I think that the truth is that it's probably always been hard.
Okay.
It might be hard in unique and different ways, right? And it's also, it depends on where you are. Like this is something that we were kind of talking about a bit before the podcast started rolling, but like it might be particularly hard for a high status woman living in New York, right?
Okay.
That might
Yeah.
might not be the ideal dating situation,
Because
right?
there's so many more women than men.
Because there's more women than men, and then also it's like the higher status you are as a person, the higher status you expect in a mate generally. And so your mating pool gets smaller to an extent. The people who
Yeah.
desire you, that's going to get broader, but the people
Right.
that you desire, it's like, you know, if you're crushing it in life, it's like most people, you know, I hate to say this, but aren't good enough for you in some way, right?
Yeah.
So for individual people, it might be very, very difficult. But I would say that overall, throughout human history, and throughout the animal kingdom as well,
Yeah.
the struggle to survive and reproduce has always been the key competition, right? That's the
Yeah.
main event as an animal.
That's the purpose
s-
of life.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it should be hard, and we
Mhm.
have every reason to think that it, you know, it was hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Why should people get into monogamous relationships
Why should
from a scientific perspective?
people? I don't know. I mean, I'm not as a scientist, I'm more interested in true and false than should and shouldn't.
Okay.
But I would say that most people, based on a variety of convergent forms of evidence, most people are going to be most interested in monogamy, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we see that there are plenty of societies and cultures for it. Like that, we have this stereotype about men that, you know, they just want to have as many mates as possible, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there's some truth to it. I'm not saying that that stereotype's complete nonsense. But if you look at cultures where men are allowed to have multiple wives,
Yep.
they generally don't, right? Something like 90 to 95% of men in non-monogamous cultures, right? Cultures where men are allowed to have multiple wives, they only marry one woman, right?
Why do you think that is?
That's a good question. I think that different species have different tendencies, and there's a variety of different forms of evidence that converge on this idea that our strongest tendency
Mm-hmm.
is towards serially monogamous pair bonding relationships.
Yeah.
So I guess we could talk a little bit about that evidence. I mean, one thing that we see is that sexual dimorphism
Mm-hmm.
predicts differences in mating strategies. So
What does sexual dimorphism
so
mean?
sexual dimorphism means like the physical and brain different, just the overall physical differences between the sexes in a given species.
Mm-hmm.
We see that in species where there's lots of multiple mating, right? Mating with different partners.
Yep.
We see that there tends to be very high sexual dimorphism in general, right? There
Okay.
seems to be an association.
Yep.
And in our species, I mean, we talk about men being, you know, on average larger and stronger.
Yeah.
But if you compare us to a highly dimorphic species, it's not even close. I mean, yes, men are larger and, you know, have certain physical differences compared to women. But if you look, even just eyeballing it, look at the difference between, say, male and female gorillas, right?
Yeah.
And compare it to male and female humans. Like by comparison, we look almost the same.
Yeah.
And so those species with less dimorphism tend to, at least in primates, tend to be more monogamous. That's one piece of evidence.
Okay.
Another one is the kind of psychological, emotional evidence, right? So the fact that, for example, we feel romantic love at all, right? So the
Yes.
fact that we feel these pair bonding emotions,
We
that's
have
interesting.
traditions around it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a coincidence. People talk about like, oh, monogamy is a social construct. Monogamy is a social construct. And it's like, all right, well, big coincidence that it was socially constructed in every society and culture on Earth
True.
ever, right?
Around the globe.
There's marriage.
Yeah.
There's no culture that we know of where there's no marriage, right? There's no culture that we know of where nobody falls in love, right?
Okay.
There's no culture that we know of where nobody gets jealous, right? Jealousy, the mate guarding emotion, let's call it,
Yeah.
right? That's a very strong psychological signal that we are interested in at the very least stopping our mates from mating with other people.
Yeah.
And so that's a piece of psychological evidence. And we even see this, I mean, arguably the least monogamous culture, right? In some ways, I mean, that's kind of a silly thing to say, but a culture with a very high incidence of infidelity and the highest incidence of female infidelity that we know of, the Himba, they're a group of Namibian agro-pastoralists, right, where most women have affairs.
Yeah.
Even among them, there's some jealousy. So, Brooke Shelza, who's the researcher who looks into them, she told me this just hilarious anecdote where, she was talking to this, and I hope I'm remembering this correctly. It was on my podcast, but she was talking to this woman who was saying, like, oh yeah, I don't get jealous. It's fine. Like, I know that my husband might, see other women, that kind of thing. I try to be mature about it. And then she gets in the car with her husband to drive somewhere,
Yeah.
right? And that same woman runs up to the car and is like, hey, bring him home tonight. Basically like getting a surge of jealousy.
Oh my
See,
god.
so I'm just saying that, like, I guess in terms of reviewing the evidence that we are a mostly monogamous primate, and I'm saying monogamous in the social sense. I'm not saying that infidelity isn't natural as well.
Right.
But the fact that we have these, monogamous unions and pair bonds, the evidence that that's natural. I would say there's the physical evidence that we have pretty low sexual dimorphism, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the psychological evidence that we
get jealous.
that we get jealous
Yeah.
and that we fall in love, right?
Yep.
And then finally, there's the just behavioral evidence where it's like, if you're looking at a species and you're saying, what does the species naturally do?
Mhm.
Generally, you just look at what they actually do. And in
Yeah.
our species, what we actually do is generally form monogamous relationships.
Yeah, not trying to go down the rabbit hole of polyamory or anything like that,
I'm happy to.
but is that because when I see polyamory, for me, I almost have a visceral reaction.
Yeah, a
And
lot of people do.
I'm an open-minded person, by the way, and like if it's your life, do what you want as long as you're hurting nobody, great, whatever. But like to me, that would be like a non-starter.
Yeah.
Do you feel like why do you think there's a surge in, what's it called, polygamy? I want to
Yeah,
say
polyamory.
Polyamory.
Yeah.
Okay, so why is there a surge in polyamory right
Yeah,
now?
I mean, polygamy is a form of polyamory, so fair enough. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how much the surge is actual and how much of it is an illusion.
Yeah.
I don't know many people. Actually, you know what? I'll go ahead and say that I don't know a single person in real life who is in a formal polyamorous relationship.
I don't either.
I know some people who are informally polyamorous. Like, they would never wear the polyamory label, right?
Okay.
They would never fly the polyamory flag,
Right.
but they're in like a situationship where one or both of them are probably seeing other people,
Okay.
right? So I don't know that I know that there's definitely a surge in the media. I don't know of any statistics, and there might be they might be there. I mean, this isn't my area. I don't research polyamory.
Yeah.
There might be a surge, but I would say that for the most part, people are socially permitted to have whatever sort of relationship they want to have nowadays. And most people still remarkably converge on monogamy.
I will also say that if you see somebody who comes out publicly as polyamorous, it's not uncommon for a few years later to see them getting divorced.
Yeah.
But that's anecdotal from my experience.
Yeah, there have been some high profile cases of it. And I don't want to look, I mean, clearly it works for some people,
Yeah.
right? There are some people who are in polyamorous relationships and they swear by it.
Yep.
They publicly stand by it. And it's frankly just none of my business if they want to live their lives that way.
Yeah.
I actually have next to nothing against it. I mean, we
I
could
honestly same don't.
Yeah.
But for me, it's just like if a guy came to me with that proposition, I'd be like, no, nothing.
Oh yeah, I'd be out as well.
Mhm.
And I think that there is something to be said. I mean, I've spoken to people like Joe Henrich at Harvard about the societal benefits of monogamy, right? I mean, if people are creating these high levels of multi-people relationships, right? The one-to-one pairing is to some extent the only way to get everybody a seat at the table, so to say.
Okay.
Right? Like
Yep.
to have these unstable multi-partner situations,
Mhm.
there's a variety of evidence that indicates that that's not necessarily and again it's correlational evidence, but it does seem that higher levels of monogamy
Mhm.
lead to higher levels of stability, right? Higher levels of
Okay.
positive economic productivity instead of economic.
So in society as a whole.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess it's kind of hard to explain why this is without getting super into the weeds.
Yeah.
But if people are mating multiply, you end up with a lot of cases where it's, one man and several women,
Yep.
right? And we can talk about this more, but what that means is that there are several extra men excluded from the mating market as a result of that,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And it seems to be the case that men who are excluded from the mating market tend to cause a lot of trouble, right?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because they don't have one, they don't have skin in the game, and two, they want to compete into the upper echelon where they can actually have access to mates,
Yep.
and generally they're going to compete pretty viciously. So again, at a personal level, I don't have anything against polyamory, and at a societal level, I'm open to the idea that it could be made to work, right?
Okay.
But I also am pretty cautious in the sense that I'm aware that there's correlational evidence that at a societal level, monogamy might be better for social stability.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense to
Yeah.
me. Kind of moving to a different topic. What is the medium ugly myth? I did not know about this until your page.
Well, I mean, I called it a myth, and I think that it might even be slightly harsh. So you see this viral trend on social media,
yes.
and I'm not sure how actually accurate it is to real life, right? I'm not sure how much
Yeah.
this is a phenomenon.
Where a girl is like, I dated a medium ugly guy.
Or I prefer medium ugly.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
And it's like, okay, well, attractive men have more mates on average.
Okay.
They start mating earlier on average, I believe. They have more committed and doting mates on average, right?
Okay.
They themselves tend to date more desirable people on average,
Mhm.
right? So men who are attractive, there's all this statistical evidence that men who are attractive do better than, quote, medium ugly men, right?
Mhm.
So at a general population level, I'm very skeptical of this idea that medium ugly is actually better,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
However, at an individual level, I could appreciate that there are some real drawbacks to dating attractive men, right?
Okay.
Physically attractive men. So
Okay.
there's some research indicating that physically attractive men are less satisfied in relationships,
Mm.
right? There's some research indicating that they are more likely to show extra pair interest, right? Extra pair interest meaning interest in people who are not in pair,
Yeah.
meaning other than their partner, right? They're
Totally.
more likely to be, have a wandering eye, let's say. And I would say that there's also some evidence that attractive men are generally less sociosexually restricted, right?
Okay.
So they're more interested in casual relationships than serious ones.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's possible that for some individual women, they go through their dating careers, right? They date some hot guys. These hot guys mistreat them. And they realize, if I aim a little lower, right, to the medium ugly ones, let's say. I also love the phrase medium ugly.
It's so
yeah,
funny,
it's hilarious.
To be honest, like I'm here for it.
Right. Yeah. But they're saying like, look, if I aim a little lower to like, if I aim lower to the point where I'm still somewhat happy with the way they look, but they're not necessarily going to be out of my league or mistreat me, then I'll feel more comfortable. However, right. So putting that aside, right, there's obviously gonna be some women like that. And I genuinely don't, it doesn't make me happy to say this, right? Like I'm not trying to be snarky, but I think for a lot of women, this is a way to cope, let's say, right? So it's like who you date, it's very visible how physically attractive they are.
Right.
And people compete.
Everyone can see it.
Yeah, everyone can see it.
Mm-hmm.
And people compete with each other over how attractive their mates are. They don't do this outwardly, generally, right?
Yeah.
Very few people. But we all know there's the situation of like, oh, who are you dating right now, right? And it's like if they don't immediately pull out their Instagram to show you, right? It's probably not an attractive person.
1000%.
And that's because we all want to, or I won't say we all, but many people want to date someone attractive and have the social status associated with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and this is, just a speculative hypothesis, but we do see this sort of behavior in analogous ways elsewhere. I think that some women are dating guys who are visibly physically unattractive, and their way of negating the status hit that they would take from that socially is saying, oh, actually, I prefer that. I could date a super hot guy just like my friends, but I would prefer to date medium ugly. So that's kind of all I have to say about that.
That's a hot take, and I honestly kind of agree with it. Like they might not know that they're doing it for that reason, but now it's like this whole trend, and everyone's like, yeah, I have a medium ugly guy too.
Yeah.
It's like a club.
Yeah, and I think that
cool.
right, and I think that I think that there's a lot of analogous things where people will claim to prefer traits that they don't actually prefer in order to negate the negative implications socially of other people commenting on it. So another example would be like people saying they prefer dad bods, right? I have no doubt
Okay.
that some people do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's huge
I definitely
variance.
don't.
Yeah, there's huge variance in what
Yeah.
people prefer,
Yeah.
right? But I think that a lot of people say they prefer a dad bod because the guys who have, you know, very fit athletic bodies are just unattainable for them. But I also think that some people probably do prefer a dad bod.
I guess they might, but I also think that, people also, it's like they may be talking about their own physicality too.
Yeah.
Where they're like, I'm not super fit, so therefore
Yep.
I prefer the dad bod because then that kind of matches, who I am
Yeah,
too.
that's legit. And I also
Yeah.
think that there's like one thing that's interesting is that we see incredible effects of muscularity on male mating success,
Yeah.
right? So it's it's very surprising because there's some research that compares, you know, the impact of height, right? We talk about height so much
Yeah, I
as
was
like an
gonna ask
attractive
you
male
about
quality.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That compares height to muscularity.
Okay.
And, you know, height is what we hear about, like in stated preferences, what people say they want, right? We always hear like, oh, he needs to be 6 foot, like, oh, he's 6'5", that's so hot, right? That kind of thing. That you hear that a lot, but then you actually
6'2", 6'3".
right,
Oh
yeah,
my God,
yeah,
done.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But then you look at studies investigating the impact of height on mating success and compare them in terms of their consistency, in terms of their reliability of producing results. Compare it to something like muscularity
Mhm.
or bodily masculinity, right?
Yeah.
Broad shoulders, narrow waist. And generally, muscularity does better,
Better.
right? Which is interesting. So it kind of goes back to what we were saying.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's kind of empowering because you have more power over your muscularity than you do your height. So
That's a very good point, actually. And another reason that I'm glad you said that because I actually wanted to mention is that it could be that height tells us very little about someone's personality,
1000%.
right? But muscularity, it's like, okay, what do guys who are jacked generally have in common, right? They're generally hardworking, right?
Yeah.
They're generally disciplined. They're generally consistent, right? I mean, some of them are just going to be genetically gifted, but a lot of them are going to have very positive personal traits.
Yeah.
And so it could be that women actually don't have that strong of a preference for muscularity.
Yeah.
It's just that guys who have muscles also have these great personal traits on average
These other things
that allow them to compete.
Yep.
And then another factor that would be kind of different from, let's say, just women finding muscles super attractive. Like, let's say maybe muscles actually aren't that attractive in practice. It could be that they are repellent to other males, right? So
Okay.
men, less so today, but, you know, throughout history and in general, and I would say still instinctively, men compete partially with fear, right?
Okay. Yep.
And so it could be the case that men who are muscular, the reason that they have such success on the mating market on average in studies is because other men are frightened to compete with them.
Yep.
There was a study of frat boys, right? It's maybe not the best sample group,
Dead. No,
right?
this is
But there was a study of frat boys,
Yeah.
and they had the frat boys rate each other on basically who can kick whose ass, right? Like who's actually able to fight, or who
Yeah.
would I be scared to fight, hypothetically.
Okay.
And then they also had the attractiveness of these frat boys rated independently, right?
Okay.
And this is obviously I'm citing from memory here, so I could be getting some of the specific details wrong, but the overall picture was that and this is just remarkable, the physical attractiveness of the frat boys was not a great predictor of how many mates they had, right?
Okay.
But their fear, right, their intimidation, their bodily masculinity, let's
Yeah.
say, was. And
Okay.
so it could be that muscularity, it could be that the reason men who are muscular do well in the mating market is because they don't have to compete for the mates they want.
That makes complete
And
sense.
there's also, you know, some question of, is number of mates, I mean, we were just talking about monogamy as kind of the measuring just raw number of mates as a proxy for mating success. Probably not the best way to measure it,
Yeah.
but it tells us something. And in this case, I think it tells us something interesting, because I would say that maybe frat boys measure their success that way.
Yeah, I could see that too, to be honest. So people talk about like personality, being hot, being rich, all these different things. So when you think about like the amalgamation of all the things that people are selecting for when they select a mate, let's start with men and then we'll go into women. But what do men look at when picking a mate?
What do men look at when picking a mate? Gosh, that's a huge question.
It is a big one.
I mean,
Is it too broad?
no, it's not. I would say that I'll actually make it broader in order to make it simpler.
Okay.
I would say that people in general have evolved to look for principally two things in mates.
Okay.
Cues to quality, right? So ability to produce robust offspring, robust,
Okay.
survivable, likely to reproduce again offspring. And then the ability to provide for, the capability, willingness, let's just say capability, to invest in those offspring. So let's put those as the two broad categories.
Okay.
So in the first category of and some of the things are going to be mixed, right? That this is something that we in a very broad sense might refer to as dual mating, right? We're looking for traits that indicate cues to quote unquote genetic quality, right? Can this person produce healthy offspring with me?
Yeah.
So that would be things like intelligence, right? Things like being hot, right? Those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Having a great sense of humor, perhaps. Then there'd be things that would be like, is this person going to invest in me, right? And can they do it?
Right.
So it's like, are they going to invest in me? Most people, the most important thing I would say is that they want a mate who actually loves them, right? In terms of a long-term mate, right? Like that's a non-negotiable. It's like the foundation. Like if this person hates me, I wouldn't want to be with them anyway, right? That's a bad idea.
Yeah.
Why is that a bad idea? It's like, well, they won't invest in me. They won't invest in my offspring. And then it's, can they invest, right? Do they have the capability? So this could be, do they have good parenting abilities, right? Personality traits associated with being, there's a reason that we wouldn't want to necessarily be with someone who's, got a short temper, that sort of thing.
Yep.
And then in a modern economy, in a modern environment, it would be things like money.
Okay.
Where it's like they can pay the bills. They're not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those would be the two broad categories, let's say, of like genes and investment. And men and women, maybe depending on the socioecology, might put different weights on those things, and then different things might go into those boxes.
Yeah.
Like, for example, for capability and willingness to provide for and protect offspring, in that box, for men, things like cues to fighting ability might come up from an instinctual perspective.
Is like tall and muscular.
Yeah, tall, muscular, broad, etc. But for a woman, those don't. For a man interested in a woman, those don't necessarily come up. Right?
I feel like for men, they care more about just like beauty.
Men do select highly for beauty, but it's interesting. So if we take a group of men and women in basically every investigation of this in every country, right? That it's been looked into, right? This is as close to a universal gender difference as you can find. If you ask people, what do you want in a mate? Men will rank beauty, physical attractiveness, higher than women.
Okay. And I agree. Like,
That's
anecdotally, I do as well.
That's the stated preference,
Okay.
right? But there's a gap between what people say they want and what people actually choose in practice, right?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you look at speed dating studies,
Okay.
if you look at some dating app data, it seems that women select very highly for physical attractiveness as well. I'm not going to say that there's no difference.
Yep.
I think that all of us understate how much we care about beauty, right? When selecting a mate. But it's possible that women especially understate it. Now, this could be for social reasons, right? I'm open to the idea that there's more stigma against women saying like, oh, I just really want a hot guy, right?
Right.
But I would say that in practice, looks matter more than people say.
Just generally. Yep.
And I think that they matter more for men than most men and women think.
Yeah.
So, for example, I'll give a couple examples of this.
Okay.
When you're assessing someone's personality, right, you're looking into who they are, right? You're looking into their personality through the lens of their physical attractiveness. This is something that's sometimes called the halo effect in psychology, right? But there's other related things, so you're familiar with it. There's other things that are not quite the halo effect, but are similar, where a guy who is hot is going to be perceived as funnier, right? He's going to be perceived as having a better personality, right? He's going to be perceived as more intelligent, even if he isn't. More likable, even if he isn't, right? I mean, they've done some really silly studies here where that, it's terrible, but they've put photos and biographies, kind of like a dating app,
Yep.
and mixed and matched them to try and determine the effect of looks versus personality,
Yeah.
right? To compare those things.
Yep.
And there was a study on women where they did this, and they found that personality mattered if a guy was hot enough, right?
Okay.
So the guys who were very unattractive,
Yep.
they were rated as having worse personalities, right?
Wow.
And they were rated as worse personalities than they would have if they were hot, and they were rated as less dateable overall than the hot guys,
Yeah.
right? Bit of a depressing finding, and again, it is just one study, but there's other studies that converge on this idea that if you're past a certain level of hotness, then personality makes a difference, right?
Okay.
And personality might matter across the spectrum.
Yep.
But if you're not attractive enough for a person's standards, then personality, it might
Becomes
matter, but it doesn't.
irrelevant
Yeah, but it doesn't quite make a difference.
for dating and
Yeah.
and relationships.
And
Yeah.
and because it's so funny, I'll share the second part of this study. They brought in the women who they had rate these photos and biographies and things like that. And
Okay.
again, the basic effect here is that there were moderately hot guys, there were hot guys, and not so hot guys. And the personality changed whether the hot guy or the moderately hot guy was preferred,
Okay.
right? But no matter what, the not hot guy was not preferred.
Right.
And the second part of this study, which is so peculiar, they had the women's mothers come in and were like, choose someone for your daughter to date.
Yeah.
And you'd think it's like, gosh, I mean, the mothers are surely going to pick based on personality, right? Because
Oh.
they don't have to be with the guy physically,
Right.
right? I hope.
Totally. Yeah.
And
one would probably.
yeah, one would hope.
Yep.
And yet they went through the same selective pattern as their daughters. There were some nuanced differences, but the basic pattern of them preferring the hot guys to the unattractive guys, regardless of personality, and I mean moderately hot and moderately attractive. I keep
Yeah.
saying hot, moderately attractive versus very
So
attractive.
they cared about that too.
They cared about that too.
Yeah.
Now, from a social perspective, this is pretty hard to get your head around because it's like, well, they don't have to sleep with their daughter's boyfriend, so why do they care what he looks like?
Right.
But from a basic sexual selection perspective, right, from a
Yep.
biological perspective, it's like, well, that's their grandchild that they're talking about, right? And so they have to care about the same
Oh,
things, right? They have to care
true.
about the good
It's
genes
their
components.
lineage.
Yeah, it's their lineage.
Yeah.
And so for the same reason that you'd want a good-looking husband to have children with, or one might want a good-looking husband to have children with, you'd also want a good-looking man to help produce your grandchildren.
Yeah.
And we can talk about why looks matter. I mean, it is, I keep saying good genes, and I want to clarify that no individual person's genes are better than another. That's a phrase
Yeah.
that comes to us from evolutionary biology.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about ducks and tortoises, it's kind of all well and good to just say good genes, right?
Yeah, but then
But with
when it's
humans,
humans,
that's
it sounds so
it's a
bad.
terrible phrase.
Yeah.
But it's just what's used in the literature, and I can't just willy-nilly rename things.
Yep.
But I will say that what we're talking about there in terms of good, it's like good from not good from a moral perspective, not good from a ethical perspective or a personal perspective, or even a pleasure perspective. Good as in more likely to produce offspring who are more likely to survive and reproduce.
Okay.
So one example of this
Mm-hmm.
is just the sexy son hypothesis. This is going to sound like circular logic, but it's
Yeah,
not.
I need to hear what this is.
If some physical traits are preferred by women,
Mm-hmm.
then women are incentivized to pick those traits because they will have sons who have those traits
Oh,
and then are preferred by
interesting.
women themselves.
Yeah.
Right. So let's talk about it because talking about it with humans, it feels kind of crazy. So
Yeah.
it's easier to start with like an animal example,
Yeah.
right? So if you're a female peacock, and I'm not saying that this is how, or if you're a peahen, right?
Yeah.
Obviously peacocks are the males.
Yep.
There are peacocks of varying physical attractiveness, right?
Okay.
And the peahens choose among them.
Yep.
The peahens who choose the attractive males
Mm-hmm.
will have some male offspring. And
Yeah.
those male offspring will have their dad's traits, right? And so they are more likely to have grandchildren as a result of picking the attractive mate, right?
Got it.
So this isn't necessarily why traits become attractive to begin with, right? But the sexy son hypothesis basically posits that once something is attractive, whether it's attractive for arbitrary reasons,
Yeah.
whether it's attractive for actual pragmatic reasons,
Yeah.
once a trait is attractive, well, then selecting it is a really great decision because you're going to have attractive offspring who will have an easier time reproducing themselves.
Yeah, you're like setting up your
Yeah.
future kids.
And it's
for
framed
that.
it's framed as sexy sons, but it's really attractive offspring in general, because it's in the original iterations of this theory were built on species in which males compete for female attention,
Yeah.
but humans are a mutual mate choice species where, as you well know, as a matchmaker,
Yeah.
the women are partially competing for the men and the men are partially competing for the women.
Oh, for sure. We have clients who they'll say they want X, Y, and Z, and it's like we'll go out and find that, but then that person who we find with X, Y, and Z has to agree to date
Yeah.
you too. It's not just like go buy me a car,
Yeah.
like an object.
Yeah.
Okay, switching gears a little bit. I think the whole attractiveness thing is like so intriguing. How should people, okay, you say that people should not try to date out of their league. How do you know what your league is?
That's interesting. Well, I wouldn't say that people should try to date out of their league.
No, they should not try to date out of their league.
They just should not try to. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think that there are trade-offs to dating out of your league,
Okay.
right? So there people think about all the benefits of like, oh, I want to be dating like a super hot guy,
Yeah.
and it's like, as we discussed, a super hot guy comes with extra hassles,
Yeah.
right? Or I want to date a super hot woman or whatever. A lot of the stuff I'm saying is I'm saying it in a gendered way, kind of
Yeah.
facing towards men. But basically, everything I've said on this podcast, you could flip the genders around and it'd still be true.
It still applies.
Yeah, still
Okay.
applies. I just recognize that your audience is probably mostly
Women.
yeah.
Yeah, for the most part.
So, with that caveat of like, if you want to date someone out of your league, you know, there's some risks to that, but it's fair enough. With that caveat kind of out of the way, in terms of how do you know what your league is, it's funny, people aren't that good at assessing their own attractiveness.
Really?
No, they're not that good. It's
Okay.
interesting. I'm not saying that they're bad. I'm just saying that like you look in the mirror and you think that your vision is accurate. There are a couple of depressing and seemingly consistent effects where people who are, and again, this isn't perfectly my area, right? There might be some things I don't know here, but it does seem to be the case. For example, it does seem to be the case that people who are unattractive aren't great at realizing that.
Oh,
Right?
really?
They're largely blissfully unaware and
Unaware.
overrate themselves.
Okay.
Right? So if you have people rate themselves, people who are unattractive tend to overrate themselves. And, you know, people of middling attractiveness tend to be more accurate. And then people who are very attractive, like extremely attractive people,
Yeah.
they tend not to quite realize it. You know, they don't necessarily fully have a grasp on like, you know, they might be a 1 in 100 beautiful person.
Right.
And they just think like, oh, maybe I'm, you know, 1 in 10.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
That's not specific numbers from a study, but that's the general phenomenon that we're seeing. So I would say, how can you make your guess more accurate, right?
Mhm.
It might be depressing for some people, but I would say look at your exes, right? So if
Okay.
you've dated, you know, if you've got a few boyfriends, a few girlfriends in your past, it might not be a bad idea to just take a little look. And, you know, people, interpartner correlations of attractiveness tend to be somewhat high. And so it's not necessarily a bad idea to say, well, how attractive are the people I date? How attractive am I? Let me see. Who have I dated? Oh, everyone I've dated is super hot. I'm probably super hot because
Right.
super hot people generally date super hot people. But it's like, oh, everyone I've dated is actually very unattractive. It's like, well, very unattractive people generally can't date very attractive people. So
Yeah.
interesting. I will say, though, as well, that just as a note, and maybe as a corrective measure, is that when people look at couples, right, generally the woman is rated as more attractive than the man, right, to other
really?
people. Yeah.
Okay.
And I would even go so far, and this kind of comes to me from Alexander from Date Psychology. I don't know of anyone else who's made this point before him, but it might just be worth saying that it seems that women are objectively more attractive than men in the
Yeah.
sense that when men and women rate women and men,
Mhm.
right, the women get rated much higher, right?
Okay.
And this could be for a variety of reasons. I'd be open to it just being kind of plain, like in the same way that male peacocks are more attractive than peahens. It could be that, you know, female humans are more attractive than male humans, right?
Yeah.
That's possible.
Yeah.
That happens in species. That one species leans more into physical beauty.
Yep.
But even if we were dead even, you'd expect to find this gap. because across cultures and to an extent throughout history, certainly as far as I'm aware, women have generally, on average, put more effort into their physical appearance than men. Right.
Yeah.
And so let's take, I know that there's all this like gender wars online, and people, like to get all riled up about disagreeing with this sort of thing. But think about it, just take gender out of it. Imagine you have two groups of people, and one group spends half an hour more on their looks every single day.
Right.
Which group is going to be hotter?
That person.
That group. Yeah, that group
Yeah.
is going to be hotter. And so we're seeing that with men and women, where women spend more time on their looks every single day.
Yeah.
And so when I, come onto a podcast and say, oh, women are more attractive than men, people are like, oh, that's not true. Like, do they have to be even? And it's like, no, they don't have to be even.
Right.
One group is spending more time on their looks.
Yeah.
Are you really surprised? Like, and if, as a man, it's like, you should be thankful that you can outcompete other men in the looks department pretty easily, because most of them just aren't trying that hard.
They're not trying that hard.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, you said something about girl beauty versus male beauty? So like men find different things beautiful in women than women find in other women.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Is
it's
that a thing, or what is it?
I think it's generally the same, to
Oh,
be
it's the
honest. I
same?
mean, that
Okay.
video went super viral, and I was more commenting that there are small
What are the
small
things?
differences.
Because I feel like, yeah, like sometimes
I
men
got-
will be like, that girl's so hot, and
I
then
know.
women are like looking at a different girl and being like, she's so beautiful.
I know,
Yeah.
it is interesting. So
Yeah.
I would say that usually there's pretty high agreement on, like, I think that if we
Yeah,
brought
it's
out,
usually
if we brought out a range of actors or actresses, I think both sexes would be like, yeah, this is a good looking group of people.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But there does seem to be a difference in terms of the people that women fawn over versus the people that men fawn over. And
Yeah.
I would say that's true of both sexes, right? I would say that, to an extent, does he need a little attention?
No, you can keep going.
Okay.
He's just annoying.
I don't think he's annoying at all. No, he's a lovely dog.
Come
I
here.
would say, what were we talking about? I'm sorry, I got distracted.
You were
by
gonna say like the small little nuances
Oh,
of
yeah,
what
yeah,
men
yeah.
like versus
Yeah.
what women see. In
Well,
each
one
other.
of them, I mean, it's kind of funny because the beauty a beauty magazine basically criticized me for saying this, but all I can do is say it again because it is true,
Yeah.
that on average, women perceive they perceive the beauty standard as thinner than it is for men,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So that it's
Men
not
like
even
a
that,
little,
this is something
men
that
like a little curve.
yeah, so this
Yeah.
has been replicated in multiple studies. I genuinely didn't say anything I didn't say anything that would be controversial to anyone who
I welcome it. 'Cause
Yeah.
it lets us all eat more.
I didn't even think that it was that bad of a thing to say, but they were like, this is nonsense, da 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 da, like that
Yeah.
the thin beauty standard, it comes from men. And I'm like, I didn't say that it didn't come from men. I'm just saying that on average, if you take men and women
Yeah.
and have them rate how they perceive the attractiveness of a body
Yeah.
or pick their favorite body,
Yep.
women on average pick lighter women than men pick.
Okay.
I'm not saying that men pick and some people on the other side, some, crazy misogynist bastards were like just coming on and saying that,
Yeah.
that it's not true and men do want thinness. I'm like, I didn't say that thinness didn't matter to men. I just said that on the spectrum, men tend to
Generally
they tend to
speaking.
select more average weights,
Yeah.
and women tend to select more, just by comparison, thinner weights. So I would say that that's, just to go back to the question. Sorry, I got kind of wrapped up in just the
And then also
just the
Archie's over
rebuttals.
here.
Yeah. But
Um,
just to kind of pin down that point,
Yeah.
one difference between the kind of folk psychological concept of like guy pretty versus girl pretty, like who
Mhm.
do girls like versus who do guys like when
Yep.
they're selecting who's a good looking woman. Men generally prefer slightly heavier women than men do.
Than women do.
Yeah, men generally prefer slightly heavier women than women do.
Yep.
And I also don't think I don't think that should be that surprising. And I think that the reason it shouldn't be that surprising is that you can go to a CVS or a gas station right now and just look at the magazines that feature women that are aimed at men
Yeah.
versus those that feature women that are aimed at women.
Interesting.
And you'll see, I don't know if there's been any study on this. I mean, there certainly have been some studies on BMI and in Playboy centerfolds and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I think it's patently obvious that the women who are modeling for women tend to be very svelte,
Very,
right?
very skinny.
Very, very
Yeah, it's
skinny.
crazy.
And I'm not saying that it's an obtainable or attainable or fair beauty standard at all, but can we say that on average it does seem that the women men are interested in
Mhm.
are less thin? I think that that's fair enough, and it's something that replicates in the lab. Even if, you know, maybe you do a magazine study and what I'm saying isn't true, I'm really speaking anecdotally.
Yeah.
But anecdotes aside, the data is there as well.
Yeah.
And the data generally shows that men care less about thinness than women.
Yeah. No, I actually really like that. I think it's empowering and freeing for women because
Yeah.
the beauty standard and like surrounding thinness it's a lot.
Yeah. And there's a lot of interpersonal variation as well, where we see that, you know, individual men will prefer a wide range of weights. Individual men will prefer a wide range of weights, and across cultures, you know, in some cultures, very heavy women are preferred.
Yeah.
Very, very heavy compared to. I'm not saying that, and again, there's no valence on that.
Yeah.
You know, it's fine to be very heavy. I don't see an issue.
Totally.
Yeah.
We're both open-minded here.
Yeah. No,
which we love.
it's totally chill.
We only have a few minutes left, and I have so many questions. We're obviously gonna have to do a part 2 at some point, maybe over video, because obviously you live in Australia. I'm trying to decide where I want to kind of go. There's a few. Can we do like a little rapid fire? I know you like to give the background on everything, but I do want to quickly touch on everyone being obsessed with body count.
Okay.
And like, why is everyone so obsessed with body count? And what's your take on that?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think that a lot of the obsession with body count is driven by these kind of men-facing podcasts,
Yep.
and they're saying that, you know, they're saying negative things. I guess the key feature is that they're saying negative things about women with high body counts.
Yep.
And they say that it's a research-driven thing based
Yep.
on the idea that, like, oh, people with high body counts or women with high body counts are more likely to be unfaithful or less likely to be satisfied. And it's like, well, there is some research showing that sort of thing, but it
Mhm.
shows it for men as well.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's kind of weird that
It's the
these,
same thing across the board.
I know, and
It's
these,
people with
yeah,
high body
but
count.
they don't say that. And that makes me suspicious of them saying that it's purely research driven, because these same podcasts will say things like, oh, men should have high body counts and men should be playboys and that kind of thing. So like, it
Who
doesn't
are they
seem
having sex with then?
right.
Yeah. Like what?
Well, that's the other thing, is that the whole body count discourse of like men should have high body counts, women should have low body counts. Can anyone not notice that that's just a failing vision for society?
It doesn't make any
Like
sense.
we can't, that's mathematically that doesn't work. So you
Right.
can't say like, oh, men should sleep around, women shouldn't. It's like, unless the men are sleeping around with each other,
Yeah.
that's not a realistic vision
And
for the
it's
future.
very dehumanizing to women.
Oh yeah,
Because it's
especially.
like all the women they had sex with before they partnered up, they were just like subhuman almost.
Yeah, they'll even say things like recreational use only.
That's
And it's like,
disgusting.
it's completely disgusting. And it's
Yeah.
like, you can't even listen to it.
So what is the average body count?
I think it's much lower than people in New York, I think.
I feel like if it's like the average, is it average for America? Because I feel like it might
Yeah.
be higher in cities that they have more hookup culture.
Yeah. The average for America based on CDC data is, let's just say, somewhere around several, if we're looking average as median. I mean, their data in participants age 25 to 44, census, so it was a representative sample. CDC representative sample. And I believe it was 4 for women and 6 for men. And there's a mismatch there that could be because women generally underplay their body counts and men generally hype it up, right?
Yeah.
But it also could just be because they excluded virgins from their data set.
Okay.
So, and there are probably more men who are virgins than women. And if you exclude the zeros, right? If you
Yeah.
exclude more zeros from one side, you'll get a higher number. So it could be that the lying actually isn't having an effect. But I'm open to the idea that women downplay it and men play it up. I would say that it's fair enough to say somewhere around 5.
5.
You know,
Okay.
somewhere
That's
around that.
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a few listener questions. This person said, have there been any studies on what leads to a more successful dating profile?
More successful dating profile. Looks and education.
Looks and education?
Yeah. If we're doing rapid fire, looks and education.
Okay.
So it's like, make sure you look as good as you can in your photos. You know, I would recommend have a friend of the opposite sex help you pick out your photos. Someone
Which
who's like actually a
color?
friend. Yeah. Like make yourself, you know, make yourself conform to what the opposite sex wants as best you can, looks wise. And then,
Whiten your teeth.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
And then there's some research indicating that education level has an impact on a dating profile success.
So people like people who are more educated.
Yeah, and I don't think that's particularly surprising, but it's also not something you can change, but it is something you can advertise. So it's like if
Okay.
you're educated, I may as well advertise it. Yeah.
Okay, great. What color should women wear on dates?
What color? Well, I don't know. I mean, there's some research that shows that red is like the sexiest color or whatever. I mean, there's some funny studies where they like put red backgrounds in front of photos and
Yeah.
it has them rated as sexier or whatever.
I always tell my girls to wear, or the women I work with to wear red or
Yeah.
black.
Yeah, I think red and black are good shouts. Black is great because it's it's slimming, looks cool. I
Yeah.
like wearing black, but
Yeah, we're both in black today.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's like a funeral in here.
Uh-huh.
But and everyone off camera is wearing black as well. It looks like, which is kind of
Who
funny.
died,
But
for real.
yeah,
Yeah.
but in any case, I would say red is a good shout. It's certainly the only one that I know of that has any research behind it.
Yep.
But maybe red signals other traits that are undesirable. I don't know.
Ooh.
Yeah. Like it's possible to be more attractive, but viewed as like I don't know.
What?
I don't know, like
Promiscuous and
yeah,
red?
so well, I don't know. I don't know about red specifically. I'm just saying that it's hard to have a research driven answer. Like one example is that we see that like women with tattoos get approached more, right? And they
Okay.
generally are like more, they get hit on more, they get asked out more, that kind of thing. But then it's like men also rate them as less physically attractive. And so it could be that it's just driving up the perception. The
Oh.
thought is that the
You're
research
to sleep
seems to,
with them.
yeah, the research seems to indicate that.
Okay.
That's the perception. I'm not saying that that's
Do men value women less if they sleep together on the first date?
I don't know of any research on that. Yeah, I don't know of any research on that. So I'd be kind of speaking out of school. That's a really interesting question though.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think of 50-50 relationships? Are they fair?
50-50 is in going
Like
Dutch on the bill.
I
that
think
kind of
like
thing?
economically, maybe.
I think that, okay, well, I think that I'll just speak to the research that I know. Couples that have a more equal distribution of labor in the household,
Yep.
as in the man is picking up after himself and maybe, helping cook and things like that and
Yep.
cooking for her and that kind of thing, doing laundry, helping out the woman and the woman's helping out him, right? There's reciprocity there as
Yep.
opposed to, one person being the default. Those people tend to be more sexually active with each other, right? They tend to
Ooh. So
experience
if you
more
want to
desire.
have like a hot relationship, you
Yeah,
go
as a man,
50-50 with the duties.
as a man, yeah, if you're living with your girlfriend, do chores. And some people on the internet, I said that once before, and a bunch of guys were like, "That's not true." Da 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 da. I'm like, you think that leaving your fucking underwear on the ground is an aphrodisiac? Like this is like,
If she feels like your mom, she's not going to want to have sex with you.
yeah. I mean, that's
Like,
that's
that's
a
not a
possible
vibe.
interpretation. Is that mothering someone is gonna shut down everything?
It will shut down everything
Yeah.
for the man too, because
Yeah.
he doesn't want to sleep with his mom either.
Yeah, that's
It's like not the right
turning it into a
dynamic.
parental relationship. Yeah, so it does seem that men who step it up and do their thing in the household as well, those guys seem to be more attractive to the girls they're with. But it could be a reverse causation thing.
Okay, I'm really bummed because we were supposed to talk about cheating today.
I know.
What is your biggest piece of dating advice? And when you're giving your biggest piece of dating advice, could you also include, this is like going to be a really long answer from you, I can
Oh
feel it.
jeez.
Can you also include like when somebody's on like early days of dating, what are some like red flags that they should watch for
Okay.
and like run as soon as they see them? And when I say red flags, I mean like a deal breaker, like get out of there.
Yeah, well, I guess we've talked a lot about dating advice, as in like advice for single people.
Yeah.
And I totally understand why we've come at that, because you're obviously, you're the owner of a matchmaking company.
Yeah.
And so a lot of your audience is going to be single women. I would say that, most of my good advice is for
Yep.
people in relationships.
Okay.
And that's what, that goes back to the chores thing, but it's also, it's what we do with at my company, Couply, where
Yes.
we have this app where you both download it. You can play fun games with each other. And what we're trying to do
that.
now is we're trying to bring some of the science of how people can have happier relationships, right? How people can, have hotter, funner, better relationships with their partner.
Yeah.
We're going to bring that into, or we are bringing that into an app setting. So a lot of the things that I could say in terms of like good dating advice, it would be for couples. It would be like, hey, touch each other more, flirt with each other more,
Yep.
right? Do the things. I mean, people talk about, dead bedrooms and things like that. I'm not saying it's not tough, but it's like, are you are you doing the things for each other that you used to do when you first met each other?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, so why are you expecting, there to be all that follow through where you're both,
Yeah.
trying to get in each other's pants all the time?
Yeah.
And then in terms of like having those fluttery romantic feelings, it's like, it's hard to have fluttery romantic feelings when you're not doing any fluttery romantic things, right? You guys aren't going on dates, you're
Yeah.
not spending time with each other. You never compliment each other, right? You're leaving
no
your dirty dishes out.
novelty.
Yeah, all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. You're
Yeah.
not mixing up, going on vacations, that sort of thing.
Yep.
There's all sorts of things like that. You're not reminiscing together. That's actually a research-backed one.
Really?
Couples that reminisce together seem to do better. Again, it could be reverse causation, but I suspect that
I love that.
yeah, reminiscing is good.
Yeah.
But in terms of advice for single people, and I recognize that that's probably most of our audience today.
Yep.
Look your best. Put your best foot forward, right? And nothing's particularly surprising here. Try to be the best version of yourself and build yourself into the best version that you can be.
Yeah.
And then, it's kind of the cliche like internet saying of like don't chase, attract.
I love that.
But there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
Like the idea that really you should be building. I think people have said that that dating is more like building a butterfly garden than going hunting, right? Where it's like you
Yeah.
want to build something that attracts the butterflies as opposed to, running through the forest with a net,
Do you feel like it's more like that for women? We're building a butterfly garden while men are like running with the axe, or do you think it's like for everyone?
I think that it's definitely more. I think that there's definitely more chasing for men
Yeah.
because women are more selective than men
Well,
on
we like
average.
we like to be chased
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Well, but yeah. Everyone does.
Fun. Yeah.
That's interesting. Women generally have higher standards for their relationships than men, and so men generally have to chase somewhat more.
Yeah.
Right. But I would say that even if it was, and I know there probably aren't a lot of men listening, but even for men, I would say, be someone worth dating. Be a man worth dating. Try to make yourself look your best, get a good job if you can, all
Get
that
some
sort of stuff.
cologne.
Get some cologne.
All
Yeah.
the things.
Yeah. And then in terms of, you asked about red flags as
Yeah,
well.
like I just need your high list because I feel like don't people like usually reveal who they are within the first like 20 minutes of meeting them?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
And like are there any like quick little like if they say this run away, or is that too broad of a question for today and we'll just have to do a part 2 maybe
think-
via Skype?
I think we might have to do a part 2, but
Yeah.
I will make some notes just to that. I would say that I can't think of anything that I would blanket recommend as a deal breaker for everybody that isn't like incredibly obvious. Like obviously you don't want to be dating a violent sociopath or something
Okay,
like
you're
that.
right. It's
But-
too
Well,
limited.
yeah, but I can think of plenty of things that predict future relationship problems. I mean, one of these would be, it does seem that someone who has an unrestricted sociosexuality, right? So they're very fond of casual sex, that
Mhm.
sort of thing, very fond of uncommitted sexual relationships.
Yep.
Those people do seem to have some trouble in terms of having like a long-term committed relationship, if that's what you're looking for.
Yep.
So, and I don't think that's particularly surprising that there's very much conventional wisdom of like, oh, I don't want to date a fuckboy. And it's like, there's reasons why.
Yeah.
And that seems to be somewhat backed by data. Someone, and this is kind of an uncomfortable one, but someone who their parents didn't have a good, healthy relationship.
Yeah.
There's some indication that things like divorce, infidelity, relationship dissolution, abuse, these things sadly seem to run in families.
Yeah.
And so, and again, I'm not saying that this is a deal breaker at all. I'm just saying that it's worth being aware of the
You
fact
need
that
to note it. You need
I'll-
to flag it.
yeah, I'll reframe it and just say that if someone's parents have a great relationship and they're happily in love,
That's a great
then
flag.
they grew up with a very positive model to follow, and that's a green flag. Yeah.
Yeah. I love this. You have to, only if you agree. I'm like really pushing the part 2. But at some point I would love to have you back.
Okay,
You're
sure.
phenomenal.
Yeah.
I love just listening to you. I could have listened to you for another like 3 hours.
Oh, that's very nice.
I feel like you need to like go on Joe Rogan or something. Like, you need like that like long format.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, plug yourself. Where can people find you? Where can people find Coupley? All the things.
Oh yeah. Well, me, it's pretty easy. If you can spell my name and you Google it, everything's gonna come up.
Yeah.
So that's pretty easy. Couply, again, pretty simple. It's couple, but instead of an E, it's a Y, and that's an app for people. That's not a dating app. It's an app for couples.
Okay.
So it's for people who are already in relationships. They found
Should-
their person and they want things to be better.
But could you use it early days of dating, or is that like
I think
premature?
I think oh well, you could
If you're bold,
you could. I think it's a bold
might
move.
be a little cray cray.
I think it's a
but
bold
could be
move, but
fun.
I'd say yeah. I mean, actually, I'm gonna say yes, and I'm gonna you know double down on that in the sense that if you guys are an official couple and you guys are just that's a really quick way. A lot of the quizzes and things like that, it's a
Yeah.
really quick way to get to know each other. I think that's an awesome way to get off on the right foot. Yeah,
Cute.
yeah.
Well, thank you again,
Thank
Macken.
you.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, no, it's been great. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Thanks.